I'm delighted, ladies and gentlemen, protocol already being established, I'm delighted to welcome you to this very important session that we have termed an Electoral Reform Town Hall, where we gather to discuss, or more aptly put, I like how Makisha said it, dialogue, because dialogue is really about speaking and listening to each other. The future dialogue on the future of our democratic processes here on St. Martin. I'm pleased to see the presence of some of our members of parliament here tonight. Your role in shaping our nation's laws and policies is of utmost importance, and your participation in this discussion is a testament to your commitment to our democracy. I would like to begin by expressing my deepest gratitude also to our distinguished speakers for dedicating your time to this event, Mr. Richard Gibson Sr., Ms. Natalie Tackling, Dr. Anders Linda Richardson, and Mr. Julio Romney. Your expertise and commitment to this topic are invaluable, and I look forward to hearing your insights tonight. I would also like to extend sincere thanks to Ms. Makisha Brooks, who you just met, our moderator, and person that we can always rely on to bring a high level of discourse to anything government organizes as the head of the St. Martin Development Fund. I trust that through your facilitation of this engagement, that it will be an enlightening and productive dialogue. Your expertise is also highly appreciated. This event would not have been possible without the hard work and dedication of the organizers. And I take this time to thank you all who behind the scenes carried out something that we've been planning for quite a while, but kept getting postponed. And I must say I'm a bit disappointed in the turnout. But regardless, hopefully it's being brought live from my page, and it will be recorded to be replayed so that others can also engage, and we will be monitoring the feedback as well from online viewers when you get the opportunity to view. Thank you again for your tireless efforts in preparing for this dialogue. To all those in attendance, both those who are watching, those who are in the room, and those who will tune in at some point, I extend you a warm welcome. Your presence underscores and gives great significance to this topic, and your engagement, your participation will play a vital role in the future of our electoral system, because it is an interactive session. For me, education is key, and education of a nation is ensuring that you have an empowered nation. Education takes place everywhere, and I assume that in a space like this, we can also be educated. We can learn something new, or we can contribute to the learning of others. Staying informed and ensuring that we can continue to educate the population is one of the key goals of this session, ensuring that we get your feedback and hear your questions and concerns to be able to incorporate them in all future legislative changes. In St. Martin, our electoral laws and processes are outlined in detail, from the general provisions to the electoral register, the role of the Central Electoral Committee, and the nomination process. It is imperative that we all understand these rules and definitions as they form the backbone of our democracy. Whether you're a resident, a Dutch citizen, or just someone passionate about our nation's future, your understanding of these laws and the role you play is key to making informed decisions. Moreover, voting in and of itself is a fundamental aspect of our democracy. It is how we, as citizens, exercise our right to choose our representatives and influence the direction of our country. It is therefore a very serious responsibility. Therefore, it is crucial for all eligible voters to understand the criteria for voting in our elections and to actively participate in the electoral process. Furthermore, it's not just about understanding our electoral laws and voting, it is also about recognizing the power we hold as individuals to advocate for change, to be the change we want to see, and actually advocate for it in how we vote. Our laws are not set in stone. They have and will continue to evolve to better serve the needs of our people and our society. Making the personal decision to engage in discussions about electoral reform and advocating for positive changes to make it serve us better is a civic duty we all share. To underscore the importance of our civic duty, I'd like to leave you with a quote from John F. Kennedy. In a democracy, every citizen, regardless of his interest in politics, holds office. Every one of us is in a position of responsibility. And in the final analysis, the kind of government we get depends upon how we fulfill those responsibilities. End of quote. So for me, it is important that we look at what we are working with and that the people understand what we are working with in order to make an executive decision, a well thought out decision in the changes we want, because the changes have to continue to serve us. We've heard a lot of discussions about changes being needed, and it is going to be up to us, those that are going to be voting in the next election, those that are going to be in government in the next election, in parliament in the next election, to make those tangible changes. Unfortunately, we've been in the past 4 years through quite some harrowing times in dealing with the pandemic, which delayed the process greatly. Hopefully, we can have a next 4 years to be able to really get the ball rolling and make the necessary changes. Your input in this regard is highly needed. So, embark on our dialogue today with open hearts and minds, knowing that what we say today, what we hear today, and how we contribute can bear fruitful results in the shaping of the future of our democracy and our beloved St. Martin. And in the very least, hopefully it would have opened the minds of all those persons eligible to vote on the importance of casting that vote and making a firm decision in the way you want to see the country move forward. With that being said, I turn the floor back over to Makisha, and I wish everyone a very productive evening.
I titled my presentation, and it might surprise a lot of people, by using the headline, "If your washing machine is not working, don't run and fix your refrigerator." The present sitting government of St. Martin, by January 2024, is on course to serve the country for a full term of 4 years. This is a surprising exception to the rule, considering that the last decennia prior to this present government, almost every year, government tumbled like dominoes, and new governments had to be reconstituted. The destructive nature of this phenomenon resulted in governance seriously being compromised, annual budgets having to be repeatedly redesigned, and servicing the needs of the people left a lot to be desired. And with each new government, a new learning curve surfaced with new people and new relationships, locally, internationally, and within the Kingdom of the Netherlands, having to be redeveloped from scratch. As a result of this, voices of discontent could be heard, calling for reform of our electoral system, with a specific aim to create stable governments that could serve the full term of 4 years as dictated by our Constitution. To accomplish this, knee-jerk suggestions have been made to change the electoral laws, to require runoff elections, for instance, resulting in one party winning the right to govern for a full term of 4 years, or to adopt a new presidential system in which a president is elected who on his or her turn appoints or dismisses his or her cabinet to govern the country. Or to adopt a district election system, electing representatives directly of each district, and suggestions have also been floated to change what is now called the Lynch Law. Electoral laws of a country are the backbone of any democratic society, shaping the way citizens choose their representatives and consequently the direction of their nation's governance. Achieving stability in the electoral process is essential for the smooth functioning of a democracy. Achieving this stability does not always necessitate drastic overhauls of the existing electoral system. In many cases, minor adjustments can be more practical and politically acceptable. Frequent and drastic changes to electoral laws can lead to confusion among voters and undermine the trust in the democratic process. Stable electoral laws provide a sense of continuity and predictability, ensuring the citizens can exercise their right to vote with confidence in the system. Familiarity with the existing system, the existing electoral laws, is a significant factor that should be taken into consideration when contemplating changes. Drastic alterations to the system may be met by resistance and even rejection by voters who have become accustomed to the existing electoral system. In established democracies, citizens have learned to navigate the system, and significant deviations can be perceived as disruptive. A good example is Israel. Israel uses the same proportional representation electoral system as is the case in St. Martin and in the Kingdom. Parties are allocated seats in the Knesset based on the percentage of votes they receive in the national elections. This system, as is the case in our electoral system and all the countries of the Kingdom, does not limit, but encourages the proliferation of political parties, because even small parties can win seats in Parliament. This system, by its nature, more often than not, leads to coalition governments, and it is quite rare for a single party to win an outright majority in Parliament. Coalition governments are formed by parties coming together to secure a majority of seats in Parliament, which can be a fragile and prone system for disagreements between the coalition parties. Governments of Israel, just as the case is in St. Martin, experience repeated unstable governments. So Israel decided to make changes to its electoral laws to stabilize government. Despite these changes, Israel at times had to go back to their previous electoral system because the changes that they made did not achieve their intended goals, and in some instances had unintended consequences. We do not have the freedom to make unlimited changes to our laws as we deem fit. We form part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands and are governed by the Kingdom Charter, which stipulates that laws in our country must be concordant with laws of all the countries in the kingdom. We have one Supreme Court, and jurisprudence and precedents form the backbone of decisions by the Supreme Court. Concordance of laws is therefore absolutely crucial for decisions that the Supreme Court has to hand down. Democracy is not a political ideology. It is a guiding principle that champions the rights and freedoms of all citizens. Democracy at its core is built on the principles of equality and representation. It upholds the idea that every individual, regardless of their background and belief, has an equal voice in shaping the course of the nation. It is a system that believes in the power of the people, where leaders are elected by the very individuals they serve, making them accountable to their constituents. One of the greatest values of democracy is its commitment to protecting human rights. In a democratic society, every citizen is entitled to the inalienable right of freedom of speech, religion, and assembly. These rights are not given to the citizens or bestowed on the citizens by the government. They are inherent to our humanity. Democracy provides the framework to safeguard these rights and ensures that they are all upheld for all. Democracy promotes the rule of law. It establishes the system where laws are created, implemented, and enforced based on the consent of the governed. This means that no one, not even those in positions of power, is above the law. It is a system that values transparency, accountability, and justice. Vox populi, vox Deo. Any measure to restrict, massage, or guide vox populi by its nature is essentially undemocratic. It is up to political parties in the campaign preceding an election to convince the voters otherwise. The fault cannot be sought in electoral laws of the country. The fault lies in political parties who fail to develop a message to convince the voter to avoid election of political parties that could lead to unstable governments. If vote buying is the cause, then vote buying has to be combated and not the electoral laws. If the messaging by political parties is unconvincing, then political parties have to get their act together and improve their messaging and not change electoral laws. If the cause is disloyal members of a political party, then the party should be cautious with who they select to postulate as candidates for elections and not try to change the electoral laws to massage the votes of the voters. If your washing machine is defective, you have to fix the washing machine and not your refrigerator. The electoral laws are a given, and the people should be free to vote as they please. There are certain mechanisms are used which are undemocratic by its nature. One, requiring that before you could form a political party to take part in an election, you have to deposit a sum of money. In its nature, that is undemocratic. That is not leaving everything free for people to vote as they please. In Israel, the threshold that every party has to cross before it can qualify to take part in an election is 3.5% of the total votes cast in the last election. That is undemocratic. We can use these small items as tools to guide and manage outcome of elections, to guide and manage that people don't vote as they please. We have in our electoral system that you have to cross the threshold of 1%. You can increase that to 2%. You can increase that to 3%, but Israel proved that even if you increase it to 3.5%, you still didn't fix the washing machine. You're fixing the refrigerator, and the problem of the washing machine continues. Finally, I'd like to say a word about the Lynch law, or the Lynch amendment to the electoral law, which basically stipulates that the candidate with the most votes on a political list is elected to the available seat instead of the order that candidates are placed by its leader or by the party on the list for election. The Lynch law, from that point of view, captures the essence of democracy and reflects more correctly the choice made by the voters. Again, I want to repeat. If your washing machine is not working, Do not fix your refrigerator. By fixing the refrigerator, your washing machine will continue to give problems unabated. Thank you very much for your attention.
Tonight, we gather to address one of the most fundamental aspects of our democracy, the electoral system. In preparation for tonight, we received a list of topics to speak about and include in the discussion. However, I wanted to take a different approach in my speech, because before we rush into solutions, we must first diagnose the problems that plague us. As the saying goes, a problem well stated is a problem half solved. Therefore, tonight, I'd like us to delve into the complexities and the nuances of electoral reform, guided by questions that interrogate the very values that we uphold. So first off, proportional representation and its pitfalls. Our electoral system operates on the principle of proportional representation, which may sound complicated, but it's quite simple at its core. The political parties present a list of candidates, and seats in parliament are allocated based on the percentage of votes that each party receives. The system has merits. It encourages a multi-party system and makes every vote count. But it's far from perfect. As we've seen over the past 13 years, the system is also vulnerable for ship jumpers, elected representatives who switch party allegiance, often causing our governments to fall. This instability not only impedes governance, but also erodes public trust in the democratic process. When governments fall due to ship jumpers or when candidates are embroiled in allegation of corruption, it's tempting to lay the blame solely at the feet of the system. However, let's be honest, we may also have a two-pronged people problem that we need to acknowledge. Firstly, and I think Mr. Gibson touched on it a little bit as well, our political parties often lack clear manifestos and ideologies, which leaves them vulnerable to fragmentation and makes them breeding grounds for ship jumpers. This glaring omission not only muddles the electoral waters, causing confusion among voters, but it also erodes the very foundation of our democratic stability. The absence of well-defined principles within parties begs the question, what are we actually voting for? It's imperative that these parties exercise better internal governance to offer clear, cohesive platforms to the electorate. Secondly, no system is foolproof if it's occupied by individuals willing to bend or break the rules for personal and political gain. Whether it's vote buying or other forms of corruption, the ethical shortcomings of candidates are a stain on our democracy that no legislative measure can fully remove. Therefore, as we think about electoral reform, it's not just about amending laws, it's about a cultural shift. We must scrutinize not just the people that we vote into office, but also the processes and the parties that propel them there in the first place. Which then brings us to the topic of vote buying and corruption, which is often treated as the elephant in the room. It's uncomfortable, but it's critical for us to address. This isn't just a violation of the law, it's a breach of the social contract that underpins our democracy. When vote buying occurs, it undermines the very idea of fair representation. It disenfranchises those who refuse to sell their vote. It elevates money over ideas, and it entrenches a cycle of corruption that goes beyond elections. But let's also consider this. Vote buying wouldn't exist if there weren't a market for it. The practice exposes vulnerabilities in our societal fabric, poverty, lack of education, or simply disillusionment with the system. And these are all issues that we need to address as well. If someone is willing to sell their vote, what does it say about their trust in the electoral process or the political promises that come with it? Strict penalties and regulations can act as deterrents, but they're just part of the equation. The rest relies on a social and cultural transformation. We need to ask ourselves difficult questions. How did we get here? And how do we rebuild a political culture anchored in integrity and transparency? That question brings us to the way forward. As we look towards the road ahead, we must adopt a comprehensive strategy. We need to acknowledge that creating the perfect electoral system won't change our current situation without addressing our role as an electorate. As citizens, we treat elections as the only moment in which we can voice our democratic preferences. However, our civic duty does not stop at the ballot. We are the institution that upholds the actions of our government and parliament. It's not enough to just plug the holes in our electoral system. We must do more as citizens if we want to see a change. while we're here debating the merits and demerits of our electoral system, maybe we need to take one step back. Because how can we answer the questions that were posed here this evening, such as, should parliamentarians be elected by a district voting system? Should parliamentarians be elected like US senators? Should separate elections be held for the electoral branch of government, et cetera, when none of the answers to these questions identify the foundational principles that we want to guide our democracy? By answering these questions, have we really taken into account our particular political history and our societal makeup, which is unique? St. Martin is a young country. The laws that we're discussing here this evening were established a mere 13 years ago. But how many of us at the time felt instrumental in shaping the foundations of the democracy that we now own? Because adhering to laws also means believing in them. So while we ponder these systemic reforms, let's also bear in mind the larger picture. Laws are only as effective as the people who are governed by them. Alongside structural changes, we also need societal reforms. This means public awareness campaigns, stronger checks and balances, and voter education initiatives to level the playing field. After we leave here tonight, let us remember that democracy is not just a set of institutions or a rule book. It's a living, breathing social contract between the government and the governed, between all of us here in this room today, between us and the people at work, between us and the people on the street, and so on, and so on, and so on. And that contract is only as strong as the integrity of the people who enter into it. We've dissected the weaknesses in our electoral systems, the shortcomings of our political parties, lapses in individual ethics, but let's not forget, these are all pieces of a puzzle that make up the portrait of our democracy. And while it may be marred, it's not beyond redemption. In addressing the people problem, the lack of a well-defined party ideology, the ethical pitfalls and snags of our candidates, we're not just finding fault, we're identifying the starting points for meaningful reform. And in confronting the uncomfortable issue of vote buying and corruption, we're not just casting stones, but we're shining a light on the dark recesses that we collectively must illuminate. Electoral reform is not a switch to be flipped overnight. It's a foundation to be built brick by brick with careful planning and steadfast commitment. We must leave here tonight not just with a sense of gravity of our problems, but with the conviction to solve them. We must commit to marrying structural change with ethical evolution, to build a system that not only withstands the pressures of governance, but also cultivates leaders who deserve to govern. Every once in a while, it wouldn't hurt for us to look in the mirror at our own characters and motivations either. In closing, let's not let this conversation end here or only pop up again during our next election cycle. Our democracy is calling for us to rise. It's calling for us to be more aware and to actively participate in its betterment. And if we heed that call, we won't just be voters or politicians, we'll be the architects of a new era of St. Martin, an era of stability, integrity, but most importantly, of trust. So that's the message I wanted to leave you guys with tonight. Thank you.
It's a bit difficult for me to come after these people. It's as if they thought the same way I thought, especially with respect to the parties. I'm going to come back to that. But I want to say this evening that when I look at the guidelines that we got, I had, even as a linguist and as someone who has been on the Electoral Council for almost 7 years, I think Makishi forgot that part. That's why I think I was asked to be here tonight. I've had experience of sitting on the council, one of the first members, and also studying that law very carefully. And that is the law on the National Ordinance on Registration and Finances of Political Parties. And in that law, you would see the word political parties. I want to say that that law was actually the first electoral reform since 10-10-10, and even though it was not really enacted at 10-10-10, because I understand several games were played so that only in 2014, we could be established, because as long as it was not established, the Electoral Council, you could not have parties registering for an election. Previously, before 10-10-10 and before 2014, some people get together maybe a few days before election, a few days before nomination day. They would come together and say, okay, we're going to run on a list. The National Ordinance on Registration and Finances try to establish that you form an association to enhance the democracy in this country. An association in which the members of the association would have a say. And together, then you would go and adhere to certain conditions and then nominate and go to the elections. We have seen a lot of interesting articles of association. And there's a word in Dutch, a proverb in which it says, papier is geduldig. Why am I mentioning that? Because those tremendous articles of association oftentimes would never adhere to. When one has to, for example, indicate what kind of finances one has received, there was also an issue. We always had an issue. We have looked at, just like others, what kind of system will benefit St. Martin. I do believe that no system will benefit if one doesn't have a strong foundation, and a strong foundation would be to have a strong political party, a foundation. It's not a party, it's not a group of people that come together only during election or just before election. A party is also not a group of people that, because there is no common ground, they can just walk away at any time. A party has to reflect a sort of a long-term marriage with certain goals and certain objectives. So when the parties were registered according to certain conditions, and we all thought, okay, now things are going to change in St. Martin. Okay, now we are seeing that the parties are coming with a group of people. In the end, we still see too much of individual campaigning and individual me. We want to suggest that although there are certain benefits to the lynch law, nevertheless, the lynch law tends to undermine the foundation of a party. And why? Because when people want to say, I got to get more votes than the leader, I have to get as many votes because then we have power in our hands. Actually, a party should function as a party. We can check it, look on the front side. There's nobody, I noticed that we're looking all over the world. We're looking in England, we're looking in America, but right here next door, we can learn certain things from the manner in which people go to elections. A party should have proper training of their people, not only those who will be going in government, but of all their people. The association is an organization of which people should be paying their fees. That's an association. It is still difficult for me to find a party that religiously have seen their members paying their fees and keeping that association vibrant. A party in the National Ordinance on Registration and Finances of Political Parties, a party has certain conditions, certain obligations, and so the party twice a year has to submit a list or a register of their donations that they have received the year before. That same party, which is an association, also has to submit financial records before the 1st of April. Now, when you have a parliament of 15 members, of which 5 are independents, and there are 5 parties, the 5 parties will have to show up at the Electoral Council. They are required to do so, but not the 5 independent members. So one would have to see, countries have to look at some of these things. As a matter of fact, the independent members who are deflecting from their party seems to be getting a pat on their back for deflecting, because they get staff, they get office, and they are suddenly on the same level as their former political leader, as faction leader. It was just recently that even the Minister of Finance complained because he had a certain budget for for the parliament members to travel to, I think it's to the Netherlands, to IPCO, I'm not certain. And suddenly the budget was almost twice as much, because you have as many party leaders as you have the so-called new independent factions. So what are we doing? First of all, we're inflating a budget unconsciously. We're inflating a budget. And again, as I say, it is as if these independent members who have deflected from their parties for whatever reason, I'm not going to get into the reason, a lot of them have caused quite some instability in this country by throwing on governments and by moving on, whatever. But it seems as if they get a nice pat on their back. They don't have the obligation of submitting their finances, as the parties have to. They do not have the obligation of coming into the Electoral Council and giving their financial reports, but they do get the extras, and suddenly they are on the same level as their former political leader. Mr. Gibson mentioned a bit, and also Natalie, the issue of political parties. I have not gone into looking at all the different systems, because for me, the basic is the party that has to be the basic of any system. Because even if you go to the district system and you don't have a functioning party that comes together on a regular basis, the thing will remain the same. If you have a party where people within the party are eating up within the party because they want to get more votes than someone else to be able to get in government, or to terrorize the leaders or to terrorize the party, because then they have demands, right? Then they have demands because, I get more votes than this one and that one, so I have demands. I must become a minister, I must become a this, etc. Well, as long as we don't come to that issue of a party with a vision, I don't want to use the word ideology, because a lot of people might not even understand that, but a vision, a common cause, the selfish attitude and the greed and the ambition just to get in a position for which they are getting handsomely paid, by the way, and that seems to be sometimes the guiding line. So again, I'm not going to be discussing whether the district system is better than the other. I'm neither going to be discussing the issue of the senators in America that I see totally irrelevant to our system. But I want to impress on you tonight, and I was asked to just speak for 5 minutes, so I'm trying to rush through a few things. I want to impress on you tonight, all of you who are about to participate in election again, build the party. And you don't have to be on a list to be part of the party. Build the foundation of the party. And that is also, you are obliged to give courses, give training. Some of the people who are, I understood from some folks, some of the people who are sometimes elected, and they are put on a party because they have a big family. They are put on a party because, I was once approached. When my father passed away, and someone saw the amount of children he had and the amount of people that would come to the funeral, a politician came to me and said, "Boy, I didn't know you had so much people. Why don't you run on the list with me?" All right? And by the way, so it's not one of my families, because I have a family member in almost every party. All right? But again, this approach, pick those who you think could have the most votes, rather than pick those who you think would be most qualified and most interested in promoting the welfare of this country rather than their own welfare. As long as we don't get to that, the political party, again, is the basis. The National Ordinance on Registration and finances of political parties doesn't mention anywhere independent members or ship jumpers. Nowhere, because the whole thing is based on enhancing democracy by establishing sound political parties. The 5 minutes up? Okay, go ahead. Mind you, when they called me not so long ago, and I said, I don't have much time because I have a lot of stuff to do. I don't have time for this. They said, you only have to speak 5 minutes. So I said, I'm going to try to put on a few things. And when I look at the guidelines that they have as a linguist and also as someone who has been in the Electoral Council for so long and having gained that experience, I saw some words that I had to go and look up in the dictionary. The devolvement of a government? I don't understand, but we will get to that maybe in the question-answer period. I will ask that question. We'll get to that. So coming back to the issue, the point that I really want to stress on tonight, and again, Mr. Gibson mentioned indirectly and so on. Again, if you do not have a sound foundation for your society by building sound political parties, where you can see even some differences. You hardly see a political party campaigning as a political party, which you see on the French side. You don't have to go far. You can see it on the French side. And it doesn't matter if the leader gets the most votes. It doesn't really matter. But what we are having, I think also, and I know my deceased friend Lynch meant well, all right? He also didn't want the leader to abuse power. But a leader should not be necessarily the one who will be putting the list together. Actually, you should have a committee who will look at the qualities, whether someone has studied this, whether you have to look at the qualities of the people to have them represented so that when they stand up and talk, they know what they're talking about. All right? They know what they're talking about. Another form of training, if I may, Madam Prime Minister, it was brought to my attention that sometimes when our people go out to represent this country, one, they do not know how to talk. Two, they do not know how table manners. All of those kind of training we have to get. When we want to talk about sitting, I was so proud of our Prime Minister here the other day in America. Thank you for representing us. We do have a Mia Motley. Thank you. Good representation. Not everyone who go on a list should be in government, nor in parliament. There are other things that they can do within the party. So my message for tonight is build the parties. Or otherwise, just get rid of that other law that I had been involved in because it isn't working in this way. When you have a parliament with 15 members, 5 parties, and 5 independent people, it's not working. We have to, and our laws are not bad, It's we who are not enacting them. It's we who are not executing them. Our laws are not, but we don't really have to go and change a bunch of things. It's we who have to implement the laws, and it's we also who have to, by the way, implement the articles of association that we put together. Some of us went to the best of lawyers and put some nice things together, but we never respect them and we never adhere to them. Thank you.
Electoral reform, a St. Martin solution. The issues with the current election system. With protocol established, I say it gives me great pleasure to have this opportunity to address this to-be engaging audience, to share my professional/expert thoughts with you on this important topic of electoral reform. And I thank the Honorable Madam Prime Minister Sylvia Jacobs for giving me this opportunity. When I was approached to be part of this panel discussion, I readily accept for 3 important reasons. First, because I was called upon by my homeland. Second reason had to do with the subject matter. electoral systems and processes, which are an integral part of my graduate and postgraduate studies focusing on comparative government and politics. However, the most important reason for accepting this invitation has to do with giving back to society. That has afforded me the opportunity to study the discipline of comparative government and politics. Thereto, I can wholeheartedly contribute to the sustainable social political development of our oh sweet St. Martin land. In its relative new constitutional status as a constituent state of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, we need to reflect on our journey so far, so we can do better in the future and have a better legacy for posterity or future generation collectively. What is electoral reform? Electoral reform is about making changes in the election system. Changes that will address disturbing factors and enhance the election process. In this regard, any consideration for electoral reforms should be motivated by positive changes in the election process or ordinances in order to promote greater democracy, prohibit criminalization of politics, choose ideal members in the legislative chamber or parliament, stop the misuse of government machinery, equal representation, etc. Needless to say, some of these disturbing factors have generated a debate for electoral reform in St. Martin, producing several democratic deficiencies which have been clearly demonstrated over the last 13 years. And these disturbing factors that has been basically demonstrated: one, the makeup of parliament that doesn't represent the will of the electorate. Two, the vote for a person who vote for one party has a different value in terms of representation to one who votes for another party. Three, the system encourages fragmentation in our party list proportional representation party list system. Four, the system fosters encouragement for persons to misuse the government machinery, that is, purposely, after being elected as a member of parliament, selecting to become a minister, thus giving them the advantage to be re-elected by presenting to the electorate things that they have done for the community. An option that is otherwise not available to other competing candidates. In effect, the deficiency alters the voting results. To confirm, with the allotted 10 minutes, we had 10 minutes, so okay. I will stop here and detail the claims during the discussion. And the claims that we were talking about during the discussion, which I look forward for debate and getting into details, but I'll just mention them here. Should parliamentarians be elected by a district voting system? Should parliamentarians be elected like US senators? Should the lynch law be repealed and or amended? Why is devolution of government and or powers important to the stability of St. Martin? Could the devolution of government be a way to circumvent ship jumping? should separate elections of the executive branch of government be conducted? Should a proportional two-round system be implemented to execute elections whereby Prime Minister and Cabinet are voted in? I look forward to discussing these issues with you because, like I said earlier, the key of electoral reform is to address those issues that affect our election system. It's not about having a wish list of things that he or she would like to implement, but about going to those things that affect our system. And looking at these lists, it should be a rather interesting conversation to set up whether or not these affect St. Martin electoral system. We have a proportional representation system, parliamentary democracy, which I think is an exceptional system. However, it could not and it will not be efficient or work properly if we don't understand it and if we don't work it properly. So I look forward for a debate, a heated discussion, and I thank you.
So how does the electoral ordinance ensure the inclusivity of minority groups and underrepresented communities in the electoral process?
My short answer is it does not.
Ooh, interesting. Would you like to elaborate on?
I think if you look at the electoral ordinance, it's very much set up, from a party system perspective. So it speaks of lists and candidates, and that's how we're going through there. There isn't much in there. It's very much, what is the election process like, and not how are we, promoting certain groups or certain minorities. And to go back, I think to part of the speech I gave this evening, I think that's a part of education that comes into it as well. And I think that's, our responsibility, I think too, as a government, as different institutions, as citizens of the island to educate ourselves as well, or, to provide the tools that our population needs. Because quite frankly, the law does not provide for that.
Putting it in context, I think it's not for the electoral ordinance to determine, I said, the equal input of persons. Inclusion. That's taken well, that's already taken care of in the Constitution. The electoral ordinance basically gives you the rules, regulation in order to be elected. It clearly states in the Constitution, everyone is entitled to participate. I guess you're 18 years or what have you. Everyone is free and clear to participate in elections. So if you put it in context, it has nothing to do with with allowing persons to participate in the election process, minorities.
Because I wanted to ask a follow-up question. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I think to get to speak to your point a bit more, and also to what Mr. Romney was just saying, I think if we want to include minority groups or different segments of our population, then we need to take a step back and look at how do we define eligible voters. Because I think that's where we're separating quite a bit. You have to be 18, you have to be of Dutch nationality. And, the question is that a fair representation of our population right now? And are we therefore, projecting a fair representation of our population into Parliament by eliminating these groups? So I think that the question isn't so much about the electoral ordinance, but it really is, how are we defining criteria for who is allowed to vote? And, and similarly, recently, Committee of Parliament actually came to the Voting Bureau, and we had looked, at different things when it came to referenda and defining, when we hold a referendum, we can make those decisions. We can say, well, we want this to be the entire population, not just people with a Dutch nationality. We want it to be kids that are 14 or 13, and we want to hear, no, but you can make those, exceptions to say, well, hey, let's listen to our younger generation and give them a voice as well, and not just people that are 18. So I think to speak to your question, and we speak about reform, I think that we need to then look and qualify and how we qualify as an eligible voter.
Yeah, so I guess my follow-up question is, well, it's a two-part now. We've talked about the voter, But what about the individual who is not a part of a particular political party? How is the electoral process inclusive to those persons from those perhaps marginalized communities that do not identify with a political party but still seek to participate in the election process?
And this is, going back to the question, this is also assuming that these individuals are able to be elected, right? That they meet all the criteria for election.
Correct. Of the right age, of the right nationality,
Okay,
but are not a part of the machinery.
right. I mean, in that sense, part of what we spoke about tonight too was this idea of proportional representation, right? And that this system allows small parties a voice and it makes every vote count. So I would say people who feel that they do not align with any of the parties, you have until October 11th. And to go out there and register. And, so you don't need to have a full slate of 21 people. We've seen that in the past elections, that even, smaller parties with less candidates were able to secure seats. So I think everybody, and that's the thing here, we need to realize, I think, how much every vote counts and how easily one individual can influence the election.
We will run for me, not a risk, but we'll run the situation that, for example, what Natalie said, and you start your own party. A few years back, I used to visit almost every party when they have a congress or a debate and see what's going on. And I remember going once to a debate of candidates of the Dominican Republic who were on different lists. So every list had on a candidate. Except for you, you were not on any of those lists because they did not consider you totally Dominican. I'll talk about Mario. So I remember what happened then, what happened during that debate, at one point, the Council of Santo Domingo told the people who were debating in Spanish, as again, every party had a Spanish-speaking person because some of the parties think then we can get a lot of votes. And then the council said, if all of you together form one party, you could have at least 2 seats in the Parliament of St. Martin. And it was a little frightening thought for me because I'm saying, could I have done that if I was in San Domingo? Although my father's from there. But it was a bit frightening because even now we hear a lot of people being very disgruntled about the President of Parliament, because some of our people saying, yeah, but he ain't a real St. Martin. So we're having some all kinds of other issues that will be playing a role. But again, that council had said, if all of you, all 6 of you, would form a party and just go after the votes of the Santo Domingo people who are entitled to vote, you have 2 seats in your parliament.
Well, I suppose that indeed you're saying that if persons are able to navigate the system as it is now, it is possible for all persons and groups, whether marginalized or not, to participate in the electoral process, which is what I think we would all want to ensure that it's an inclusive process. So thank you for that.
I guess this question could go for any one of the panelists. My question is based off of Parliament, independent members of Parliament, and the party system. I understand that almost every election we've had members of Parliament declaring themselves independent, and that contributes to instability one way, shape, or form. Now, my question is this: would it be possible in some way to have a change where the member of Parliament who is disgruntled with his party, his or her party, no longer wishes to be associated with the party, instead of having the right to declare themselves independent, they don't have that right. They're only allowed to either work it out with their party or resign, or maybe some sort of stipulation where they are suspended member of Parliament and the next person comes in line. Thus, that way, that disgruntled member of Parliament is not going to contribute to declaring themselves independent, government falling, all those sorts of things. And I understand that this could be a problem even on a constitutional level, but even if the Constitution has to change to appease something like that, again, would it be possible?
The question is a question that has been addressed before in the same manner, with the same solution that you are suggesting. In fact, in In the room here, we have former Prime Minister William Marlin, who exhaustively pursued that to bring about that change on the basis that the system we have goes from the premise that only political parties can participate in an election. Individuals cannot come and sign up and say, I want to be in a party. No, you have to form a party with articles of association, with a democratic process as to how the political party is going to operate. The problem arises when you've had an election, people are appointed to the seats that they earned from that election, and then the court appointed for 4 years in Parliament, and in the process, somebody gets disenchanted and decides, I don't want to be with that party no more. And the person actually did not meet the voting quota, so really did not earn a seat. But the law in the system we have assign seats to a party even with somebody who gets 100 votes or 200 votes. And exactly those persons are the persons who, for personal interest, there's no party loyalty or party efficient. That's why I said that the problem lies with the party in the selection of the people that they want to put as candidates on a list for an election. Because if you do not pick somebody who's really a member of your tribe, human nature is as such that everybody seeks their own personal benefit. And if they can declare themselves independent, having been awarded a seat in Parliament, the question is, can that person go with the seat which he has gotten legally and for 4 years, because you don't lose your seat in Parliament. You can be voted out as minister, but you can't be voted out as a member of Parliament. So you have that seat for 4 years. And now you're in a position where, for personal reasons, you're going to go to another party and says, man, let's throw the government, and then I'm going to appoint you as minister and make sure you take care of this for me. And that is the problem that we have with ship jumping. That ship jumping, because of the system, that people can be appointed and earn a seat in Parliament based on the number of votes they have on the list, that you cannot take away the seat from them. And former Prime Minister William Marlin fought this all the way to The Hague to get the Constitution changed. And eventually, that was denied. It was denied based on what The Hague says, because if you want to change the Constitution, all the countries in the kingdom have to get together. That the free mandate of a member of Parliament who has been appointed 4 years, you are trampling on. So we're back to square one.
If the Electoral Council is doing its job, that question would not be there. Because that's what it was created for, to oversee, to ensure what? Proportional representation. Based on, not based on what he said, but what Mr. Gibson just noticed that this has been taken to the courts, so to speak, and by Member of Parliament MP William Marlin. And I again ask person to take a close look at what Mr. Marlin has taken to court, or his suggestions. The issue here is that he was suggesting changes to who? The executive branch of government. It's not a problem an executive branch of problem. He wanted to change the Constitution. The Constitution does not need to be changed. You need to follow the Constitution. And when you suggested making changes to the Constitution or changes to the executive branch of government, that is null and void. Because the problem is what? With the executive branch of government. The legislative branch of government, not the executive branch. So why would you want to change the executive branch? And clearly you see, and the persons declaring themselves what? Independent. They can declare themselves as an independent member of parliament. Nowhere in the Constitution does it talk about independent members of parliament or alludes to it. So I think what we do, we need to understand our system and follow the rules and regulations. Like anything else, playing a game of ball, if you don't follow rules and regulations, there's nothing going to happen. See, we often use this thing about, I think it's Article 44 within the Electoral Ordinance, the whole concept, and Mr. Gibson mentioned it, what the free mandate. That's a scapegoat. There's nothing about a free mandate that says you can declare yourself as an independent member, or you can vote your conscience, so to speak. Imagine if all 15 persons in parliament, parliamentarians, vote their conscience. Total chaos.
Well,
Total chaos. The framers of governmental structure knew better than that. And if we read the explanatory notes, we will know better than that.
I'm just responding actually because my name was called like twice. And Mr. Rumley stated things that are actually not totally correct. I want to put it all though in the right perspective. How did it start? When we had a change in government, so a change in parliament, one government was sent home, and then the formateur, the one who forms the government, would get an assignment from the governor. And one of the points in the assignment was to come up with legislation to stem the ship jumping. Personally, my take had always been, we are a very young democracy. It would take some time for Parliament to adjust, for people who are elected to Parliament to realize their responsibility and act in accordance with same. It would also take some time for the people who are voting for A, the individuals, or B, the parties that promote these individuals to say, well, you know what, that is not a party I should be voting for. It will take a time. So we can't expect to function at a level of a democracy that was there for 300 years or for 250 years, and we are a democracy at the time of 4, 5, 6 years. So the assignment included come up with legislation, adaptation to stem the ship jumping. And at that time, there was never a discussion about an issue of principle. So we want to adopt, let's say, people at the age of 14 can get a driver's license, and the government is promoting that, and members of the coalition say, no, I can't support that, and therefore I'm leaving. You never had those kind of discussions. It was always basically a juggling of, hey, if I leave, I can form the government, and then I can do this. So my thing was, if you have a St. Martin problem, then you need to find a St. Martin solution. And the proposal that I made at the time was a ship jumper can leave the party, he or she. If I'm in a party and I'm no longer, for whatever my reason may be, I no longer want to remain there, I can leave. But if we want to nip that kind of movement, then we would say, and that was my proposal, the ship jumper cannot be part of the formation of a government. So political parties, our constitution and our electoral system is based, like you guys just said, on political parties. No longer could it be, like in the past, the day of election, any individual could have walked in to the census office and handed in a list. One individual or two people. Now you can have a list with one or two persons, but it has to be embedded in a political party, established a certain way, has to follow the rules of the Electoral Council, has to hand in this, that, and the other. So the political party is what takes part. So at the end of the election, you have probably 3, 4, or 5 political parties that won seats, and a majority of those seats, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 political parties, form the government. Now, individuals can't say, that was my premise, well, I'm going to leave, throw down the government, and then I am going to negotiate with 1 or 2 other people who may have left their party also to see if we can realign a new majority. The advice or what came back from the Dutch government at the time was, no, it's against the free mandate. A member of parliament has to remain with his rights and privileges in terms of voting. Now, we have never gotten an opportunity to finish that debate because I left office. But one of the things that we should not confuse is what is taking place today. That has nothing to do with the Constitution. It is something that Member of Parliament William Allen has been opposing from day one in 2010. You want to leave? Leave. But you cannot become a faction. Because to become a faction, you have to take part as a political party in an election and win 1 or more seats. So you can't have 40, 50, 70, even 120 votes and say, no, I am faction William Allen. I am faction Rudy Ellis. I am faction. That should not be. That has nothing to do with the Constitution. That has to do with the rules of order of Parliament. That Parliament has to change. And then you come to the problem that you have, similar problem with Parlatino. If the majority are benefiting from this, you may not find a majority vote to change it. Right now, we have 10 faction leaders. Whenever we are going to IPCO, for instance, to Holland, 10 faction leaders are going to IPCO. Whenever there is this, 10 are going. And I mean, Parliament has to clean up its act where these things are concerned.
All right, so to answer the question that was posed by Ms. Brooks, which was, how does that affect the people, the ship jumping? Being in the communities, most of it actually comes from what was mentioned by the Voting Bureau, which is they don't understand. And then there's frustration because something happens. It affects them negatively. They have no power in making it, like having any kind of way to stop it or influence how it happens, and there's no real explanation to it. Like one of the things that I was told once, and this was from a student, they're like, why do they motivate every other vote, but they don't motivate or explain exactly why they're leaving the party? Because if they can do that, if it's about the ideals, if it's about, because I feel that making someone be loyal regardless of what's happening in the party also takes away from the democratic process. So if I can motivate my reasoning and there can be some kind of requirement or anything that lets the people say, hey, you know what? I don't mind why he or she decided to leave. I do agree with that. Then there's more of an involvement, there's more ownership to it. So that's the general idea of how the feeling is. And I would also like to know, is that something that can be, motivated? Because the thing is that our elections, usually when you hear education about politics, it's during the election time. There is no continuation of it. And I'm not saying that's just on the party side, because there are parties that continuously, as associations, try to educate their members. But in general, when you talk to high school kids, and I mention high school because they're the next voters, they have no idea what the process is about. They have no idea what's happening. Half of them have no idea who's sitting in parliament. So it can't be something that happens seasonal. It has to be something that's continuous so that the people can understand.
Well, I think we would probably get into the same free mandate discussion once again, which, that we can talk in circles on these political, principle ideologies. But I think to it, it depends again. This is the horse I'm riding tonight, which is that we need to be better people. And, because I can imagine, sometimes with the baby just throwing toys out of the pram, there's not much motivation and explanation there, right? So I think it depends on really what the reason is that the person is truly breaking from their party. And sometimes, I think there's also a strength in not airing all your dirty laundry, which may be some of the things that happened, these days as well, that people just don't want to throw mud in public either, other than, hey, we just don't see eye to eye anymore. And, I question how much that's any type of consolation to the public and their taxpayer monies that, that are going into funding an entire other faction. I don't know that there's any real justification or good explanation for that.
In essence, our system of government, proportional representation, our parliamentary democracy system, chip jumping is not permissible, period. So this all is going through this, it's neither here nor there, it's not permissible. We do it, yeah, but basically it's unconstitutional. And I dare to tell anyone can tell me where in the Constitution that it allows for that. More importantly, where in the Constitution or in the rules of order, I don't care where you search, that Parliament is allowed to accept or to declare someone as an independent member of Parliament. In essence, what Parliament is doing is voiding what? Me and your vote. They are voiding what electorate says. So this whole exercise, it's neither here nor there. We don't need to go through that. We just need to follow the concept or the whole idea of proportional representation.
I fundamentally agree with Mr. Romney's position. I think it is unconstitutional to have independent members of parliament. I can't see it. I don't know where it is in the legislation. So I think my issue now becomes, what do we do to address the issue? As in most things, as Ms. Richardson has indicated, we have the law, but we have no enforcement. So people are permitted to continue, or bad behavior is permitted to continue. And we can argue about the mandate 44, but the reality of it is, whether you agree with your party's position, you can always still, this is the only point I don't necessarily agree with Mr. Romney on, you still vote with your conscience. You don't have to declare yourself an independent candidate to do that. So that's, in that regard, that's one. And I think there was another point with regards to the devolution of powers. It said devolve government, but I think it was clearly, I think the question should have been, or should we have a clear voting, or should we vote for our executive, should we vote for our legislature, and should we have the judiciary? A clear separation of powers as a devolved system of government. I think that alleviates a lot of the issues as it relates to ship jumping, because you vote for your legislators, and you vote for your executive branch. You know who you're getting, you're voting for your prime minister or the team. And I think our perspective is somewhat limited as well. Where do we want to see St. Martin? Democracy has to reflect not only the St. Martin now, but the St. Martin we would love to envision. What does that look like? Is that a republic is that there's so many different concepts on what St. Martin could look like, and if we only think about it in the here and now, we limit how we reform our systems, and that's my 2 cents.
I love the discussion. I actually like to hear these kind of discussions because it kind of fits into what we all need to be talking about. We are talking about ship jumping, we're talking about stability of government, but there is one thing that I failed to hear today, and that is the actual cause of the instability of the reason why government drops. If somebody ship jumps, they say that I don't align with my party anymore. Nothing happens with the composition of parliament. I am a sitting MP, and regardless of all the calls I've had these last 4 years to drop government, to take a minister, if I want to pick a minister of whatever ministry, that is happening. But guess what? You cannot legislate human character. So it is up to me, one of the people who the people chose, to say no, to stand firm in my shoes and say, regardless of everything that you offer me, whether it's positions, money, or people, I am going to say no because I do not believe in corruption. That is a personal choice of me as one of the 15. And I think that the emphasis on that is being put in the back seat, and we are looking at a sort of a system that seems to be wonky, while we are the ones who is making it that way. If somebody ship jumps, for example, nothing happens with those people who are in parliament. But you know what happens if somebody invokes Article 59? If the prime minister then decides, you know what, based on this difference of composition or whatever happens in parliament, because like Article 44 says of the Constitution, de staten vertegenwoordigen het gehele volk. That's it. It doesn't speak of one member of parliament. It doesn't speak on 15. It doesn't speak on political parties. It speaks on the body of parliament representing people. That means I have to represent everybody in this room, and MP Gums has to represent everybody in this room. That is the principle of what our Constitution has for us as parliament. So if the composition of who is in what faction and whatnot changes, it is also up to us to legislate, okay, you know what? What if we decided that when we elect 15 MPs, instead of we have factions with staff, everybody gets one staff member with a very low salary? What then? Does it matter who is an independent faction and whatnot? Because it doesn't have any implications on the budget. So we are acting as if these implications that are around the body of parliament is what's causing it. The problem is very simple. If somebody in parliament decides, you know what, for whatever reason, I cannot align with you guys, and then for whatever reason, and then I'm going into what MP Marlin was talking about, I find that I should be part of a new coalition or formation, whatever in government, which they have offered many times, that is perfectly possible. But you know what the law does not say? That when that happens, when the composition of 8 goes to 9 or 10 or 11, that the prime minister in their turn then has to drop government. It is perfectly normal that the composition of who is in coalition and who is in opposition changes in a 4-year term. We don't need to be sent to elections and go through all these financial burdens just because the prime minister then said, you know what, if y'all are going to change who is going to command me, then I'm just going to send you home. Because that's where the tit for tat comes into play. That's where the problem comes into play. That's where we now are going to place the blame on the ship jumpers while they haven't invoked Article 59. If we decide to join the coalition, no, it is still up to the prime minister to invoke Article 59 or not. She can say, well, you know what, I respect Parliament, if this is their choice, and I will respectfully step down, let them choose a new composition of council and ministers to go through that term for us to make it to the 4 years. That is up to us as people with our characters, and that's me speaking from experience. I cannot speak for any other MP. I have personally seen MPs drop governments for the wrong reason. Our current coalition currently has 3 ship jumpers in it, so we do not have to act as if it is something so weird. No, we have to look at the problem. Like Ms. Sackling said, it's us. It's our character. It's in us. We need to stop thinking that because we are elected, we somehow create some sort of independent thinking in which we can decide we are the bosses. It doesn't work like that. Even though you don't align with your party, that's perfectly fine. But like I said, I perfectly agree with what Mr. Romney said. Maybe you don't need a faction. Maybe you don't need to be a faction leader. Maybe you need to go to IPCO. All of those are formalities around what Article 44 says, is that Parliament represents the entire population of St. Martin. So, coming to my question.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, my goodness.
Coming to my question. In the case that me, as an MP, for example, cannot align with my party, and I cannot see it, I cannot foresee it in the future, but I cannot speak for others in my position because we've seen it happen. If something fundamentally is going wrong with my party, if I see that my party is getting ombudsman reports of corruption, but deciding they are not going to act, if they are not going to act on accountability on our high councils of state, giving their concerns, I, as a member of parliament voting my conscience, have the right to say, come on, guys. I cannot be aligned with you guys if we are in coalition and we are meant to hold these ministers accountable, yet we are doing nothing. And I think that it's perfectly reasonable for a member of parliament to say, you know what, I cannot align with you guys. Doesn't mean I got to drop government, doesn't mean I need more staff, doesn't mean I need to become a faction. But I have my principles and I have my people to represent. So I cannot align with a party that stands for corruption while I still have to go through those years.
MP
So,
Peterson, your question?
so the question is, what would be the solution for an MP in the case that they cannot align with the party based off of principle matter and not for corruption or a deal or whatever?
You know, there's several aspects of tonight's discussion that I think that it does not come over clearly as to what the real problem is. There's confusion about whether a member of parliament can declare themselves independent or not. It's standard. Members of parliament at the beginning of the government period, all they do is state, I am supporting the government program for this term, or I'm not. Or along the way, they change their mind and say, I'm no longer supporting the government and its program, and they become independent. It happens here, it happens in Aruba, it happens in Curacao, it happens in Holland. So it's a standard thing. It's not an exceptional thing. And again, when you talk about free mandate and your conscience, parliamentarian is bound by an oath to vote their conscience. The basketball player, I'm going to refer to him as if I may, pose the question, you know, it would be good if a parliamentarian who is ship jumping or declare himself independent explain to the people why and give and motivate why they're doing that. You know, human beings, the nature of people, you could assume from the beginning they'll tell you a lie. That's the reality. Whatever motivation they give does not cover what they really are doing. Maybe they made a deal with a minister, or maybe they made an agreement with another opposition member, we're going to take the steps to make this government fall. So whatever motivation they give, because no political party, as far as I know, have a philosophy that differs from the other party here. They're all the same. They all want the same thing. The only difference between these parties is who is going to be in power and who is going to wield the scepter in governing St. Martin. That's it. And their personalities, human nature comes to the surface, and that dictates what they do or don't do.
First of all, let me say thank you to everyone. I think the idea of having these sessions was something that we wanted to start more than a year ago, so it wasn't like right in the heat of elections. Several things came in the way, and I was even asked, why bother doing that so close to elections still? And for me, educating the population is the reason. At the end of the day, there are changes that can or cannot be made, and from what I've heard from all our panelists, is that most of the changes need to happen at the core of the election process, which is within the party system, to really create the party that is gelled. And I think we have an opportunity to do so because all of the last elections were done as snap elections. And so there was no time. There was a 3-month space or something like that. Help me, Natalie? Yes. From the time, government quote unquote falls. So you end up with just that small space of time. And so everyone knows since whenever that election will be in January, you have the opportunity to prepare, even though some, were calling for it earlier. At the end of the day, we have, together with the main voting bureau, come out on the dates that would give this parliament the 4-year time to sit. So parties have, as she mentioned, until October 11th to be registered. I think we have 2 new parties already. Correct, registered. I see one in the room. Yes, I see one in the room. So parties have done their due diligence way before election, which is good, but they still have the opportunity until the 11th of October to be registered. Parties, it behooves you up until November 22nd on nomination day to ensure that you have a program that the people on your party actually believe in. So I think that is, as Mr. Gibson said, don't fix the fridge when the washing machine ain't working. Really going into what are the root causes of the problem. I think all of the panelists talked about that. And some said the system isn't necessarily broken, it is the people. It is we, the people, literally, those who are putting themselves on lists and those who are voting us in. So we, the people, I feel, between now and elections, and continuously, as was mentioned, need to continue to educate ourselves. I know the training that was talked about, it should be continuous. Persons should continue to learn and see themselves as, lifelong learners, because even though you're in a system, especially when you start running, you don't go back to look at all the details of the law unless you're forced to. So all now, while you're preparing for your programs, really look at the ordinance for political financing and registration. Really look at electoral ordinances and look at the law on integrity of ministers. Because a lot of people have comments and things and they make statements that are not based on the facts. We are just doing things how we're used to doing things, and then when we go delving in law, it's like, ooh, is that what it actually says? And I can attest to being guilty as well. Okay, because when you're actually busy, you're not as in-depth in your legislation as you would like to be. So you really have to surround yourself also. And therefore, that is why you have to ensure that within your system, within your membership, that you do have that full participation, whether you are sitting in the seats or not of your party. I want to thank the presenters for sometimes differing views. We did have a bit of a debate, and someone told me who came to watch Parliament the other day, when am I going to actually see a debate? I saw one today. And it is good to have dialogue. It is good to disagree, because then is when you can really assess what it is we're talking about, hear the different sides of the story to find the solutions. I believe the solutions lies within us. And some of them, one member of parliament said this when I was in parliament on this topic, is that there are certain things within parties that can be done. Again, which of us will have the guts to do them? To enforce the same constitutions upon which our parties are founded. So maybe assess that as well. This is a reality check for all of us. One of the clear questions that came out of the survey was a majority of people do not see what they elected reflected in the current government. And that talks about parliament and government together. I'm not looking at just parliament or just government. In fact, even that explanation some people don't get. So for me, it's still important to have the discussion on whether, because somebody who's talking about it, you have the election of your parliament, and instead of depending on a majority to decide who will sit in government, also elect at least a prime minister who put forth a cabinet so that people see what they voted for. I don't know. Again, I threw out a couple of things on the floor of parliament that day, and they're like, oh, she wants to show the lynch law. Oh, she wants to do this. They were thought-provoking questions. They were things that we need to talk about honestly as a community, and I agree with Ayana, where do we want to go from here in preparing our country? And it definitely cannot continue with keeping the people ignorant as to the processes. So that is what this is about, ensuring that we educate our people and then we live with what we have voted for. We live with it. And of course, question during that 4 years and hold us accountable, yes. But does that mean kick you out and then give people a chance, I believe, to execute their 4 years? And we have seen it though, with the election and the electorate, that a lot of people who have done their due diligence to be breaking and making don't necessarily get re-elected if you look good. So the people are making their votes count for some in some ways, but then of course when people move to go in ministry, etc., you see still a difference. But at least you're in government, quote unquote. So thank you for your participation, members of the audience. Thank you for your presentations and your willingness to dialogue with each other. Thank you, Makisha, and of course to the organizers and Department of Communications for filming this, which will be then rebroadcast at a later date. You can rewatch, break it down, create more dialogue within your own parties, within other platforms, because that is what this is about. Let us dialogue to create a better St. Martin for us all.